Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you a little bit about my thought process and how I go about selecting the decks that I work with each and every month. I get a lot of questions about this both on my channel and through messages and stuff about, how do I determine what decks that I'm going to work with for different things and sort of what my thought process is behind that. Now, I did a video similar to this a couple of years ago, but I thought it would be great to kind of revisit this because things change, right? Our practice changes, the way we go about things changes, the decks that we use oftentimes change. So I thought this would be a great topic to revisit. And with it being January and the start of a new year, I thought this was the perfect time to do that. We're actually going to revisit this by talking about how I've selected the decks that I'm going to be using for January. So you'll be seeing a lot of these decks again when I do my monthly reflections at the end of this month, beginning of next, where I'm going to share with you how I worked with all these decks. But for right now, we're going to focus on the kind of why I selected them for the things that I did. So I've realized over the years that I have kind of three main areas that I select decks for, three main focus points in my tarot practice. And that is selecting decks that go along with my monthly theme, selecting decks that have a very specific purpose, and then selecting decks that go along with very specific practices. So those are the three main points that we're going to touch upon today and how I go about the process of selecting all of those decks. So when it comes to the theme energy, every month I usually have a theme that kind of ties all the decks together in my practice. Now, for the last year or so, this has been tied in with the theme in the monthly medicine, which is the guided tarot practice that I do in the membership here on my channel. But long before that, I've always created a theme. Now, sometimes this theme comes through a particular work that I'm doing, like in January, our focus is intention, setting goals, making plans for the Weaver monthly medicine. Sometimes that theme is wrapped around a seasonal energy. So, it's really starting to come into winter here where I live. Winter doesn't really start till January. And so come January, I feel very much in that wintry energy. So the theme could possibly be seasonal, or perhaps the theme might be a certain type of energy that I want to bring into my practice. So it could be something like a nature energy. So each of these three decks kind of illustrate that idea of theme. What is my theme for the month? So there are many different ways that you can go about setting this sort of theme up in your practice. If you're following along with something like the monthly medicine or maybe those tarot challenges on Instagram, a lot of times those will have themes. Prior to doing my own more in-depth challenges, I did Lionhearts for quite a few years. And there's always a sort of cohesive theme that ties all the prompts together, and that's a great way to select your decks alongside with that. Again, you can tie into that seasonal energy or particular theme, maybe like trees or nature or something like that you want to work with. Another great thing to do to try and determine a theme is to pull an oracle card. So this is something that I also do alongside my monthly medicine practice. For January, I got Wisteria with Decelerate. So that is my theme for the month of January, alongside the intention theme that we have set with the monthly medicine. So when I go about selecting the decks that I'm going to be using for my practice, I look at what is the theme that I want to be focusing on. What's that thread that weaves its way through my practice for the month and the things that I want to do, and how can I pull in decks that will support that work. So for the theme for monthly medicine for January is intention, and we're working on goal setting, and we're working on kind of figuring out what it is that we want to create and do for the year. It's also kind of a reset month. So what I chose in terms of the decks were decks that felt like that very clean kind of reset energy. The Dreaming Way Tarot is one of my favorites for this because it's kind of stripped away of the esoterica. So it's kind of just down to the base, bare bones tarot in a sense. There's not a lot of excess emotional energy or intellectual energy or anything wrapped into this deck. It's just a very clean, solid reader for me. It's also a deck that I know really, really well because I've used it for many, many years. So I don't tend to struggle with the messages. And when you're looking at using tarot to cultivate practices such as goal setting, intentions, kind of planning and processes, having a deck that you know really, really well can be helpful for that, because you're not going to struggle with the messages, right? The information that's coming through the deck is going to be what's important, not trying to suss out what that message is. So it kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it for you. So I was like, the Dreaming Way, that's my deck for my planning, for the intention setting for the month. And then I like to pair it with an oracle. So I have paired it with the Hedgewitch Botanical Oracle, which is just another one of my favorite oracle decks. Again, it's very clean, all about the white space. There's lots of room, lots of breathing room with this deck, and it creates a beautiful companion to the Dreaming Way. So these become decks that support that theme of new intentions, which is what we're doing for January. So the theme is really important. Once I've got that set and I've got like kind of my foundational deck set for the month, I'll look through the prompts if I'm following a particular practice, or I'll just think about what other types of decks might resonate with this kind of energy. I like for my decks to work together because I like for them to feel like a whole practice contained, and then where all of the pieces are coming together to create this beautiful puzzle. So I might pull in other decks like I am this year, where I've got the Fountain Tarot here, which again feels like another very clean, very focused kind of a deck. I feel like this one is funny because it's come and gone in my collection and it's back again, but it definitely feels like that kind of an energy where we've got that clean slate, so I can get the messages, get what I need out of it, do the work, and move on. When I'm pairing it with an oracle deck, because again, I'm looking at, what decks feel like this kind of clean slate energy to me. The White Owl Mystic Arcana is one of my favorites to work with this deck, and this is fairly new, but again, you can see here that I'm getting this very clean, minimalist kind of an energy. Everything feels very much in the same kind of color palette, very much in the same kind of world. And again, this is me taking that base theme energy of new intentions, of kind of that new year energy, that January energy, and I'm pulling it all together into decks that kind of create this little temporary deck family. So that's another sort of practice that I do, another thing that I've done a video on. I'll try to remember to leave it linked for you in the description box below, but it's where I select decks that I feel like they work really well together. So as I'm going through the month and as I'm working my way through different prompts and practices and things like that, I'm always relating back to that main theme that is what I'm focusing on for the month. Again, this theme can come through those guided practices, it can come through tarot challenges, it can come through just whatever it is that you want to focus on for a particular month. Like I said, maybe you want to focus on tree energy, and so you'll gravitate toward decks that feel very much in that naturescape realm, right? I could pull this one, I could pull my tree spirits, I could pull a plethora of nature-based decks in my collection that would all sit in that same theme, all be in that same family, and they would all work really well to support each other throughout the month. So that's kind of like the main start of my selecting my decks for my practice, is to look at the theme. What is it that I want to be focusing on? If I don't already have a practice that I'm following, I can use that kind of question of what do I want to be focusing on and create a theme around that. So if I want to be focusing on trees, I'll grab tree decks. If I want to be focusing on animal energy, I'll grab animals. If I want to focus on goddesses or moon work or anything like that, if that's my main focus for the month, I can very easily translate that into a theme and select decks in my collection that feel like they support that energy. So another consideration for decks I will select to bring into my work for the month is decks that have a specific purpose. Now that purpose can totally range. I've got 3 different examples here, but there's a lot of different kind of purposes for why I might bring a deck into my practice for that particular month. One of the things that I might want to incorporate into my work is a deck that I bought for a specific purpose. Now, I'm not going to call this a practice yet because it's not something that I've fully developed and it's not something I do consistently. This is the Energy Archaeology deck, and I did talk about this deck in the decks I plan to work with in 2023. This is a deck that I will bring into my work this month with a particular purpose of getting to know it so that I can incorporate it into a particular practice. So this is an example of a deck that I'm kind of getting to know because I do have a specific practice that I want to do with it, and I'm going to get to know it first so that I can see how it's going to work and how I might want to incorporate that into that particular practice. So it hasn't developed into a practice yet, but it definitely has a purpose for me, as in I'm getting to know it, I'm studying it this month in a sense so that I can kind of work my way up to developing a practice with this particular deck. Now, similar to that is a deck that I have here, which I'm going to keep in order. I Ching, this is the Complete Divination Kit deck. It's just a little study deck. And this is a deck that I've brought in with the specific purpose of helping me to learn the I Ching. Now, I am not intending to ever read with this deck. This is simply a flashcard deck for me. So it doesn't really have a practice. It is a part of a larger study that I'm doing, but it isn't related to a specific practice. It just has a purpose of being a study deck for me for the month. So I might look at decks that I want to use in this way and, bring in for a particular purpose because they're going to support something in particular that I'm doing throughout the month. Another kind of a deck example of a deck that I'm working with for a particular purpose, this is the Phantom Wise Tarot. I have edged mine in red. This is a deck that I will bring in because I'm trying to get to know it and I'm trying to determine if it's going to be a good fit for me or not. So it's not really like I'm trying to get to know it so that I can use it in a particular way like I am with the Energy Archaeology, and I'm not using it to support a larger thing that I'm doing, such as the case with the I Ching. This is a deck that I'm getting to know. It's a new deck in my collection that I'm trying to determine if it's going to be a good fit for me. So it's a deck that I am working with not in relation to any theme or any one particular practice. It's just a deck that I'm working with, getting to know, and spending some time with throughout the month. And this is often the case with newer decks in my collection. I'll usually pull in one or two new decks that I'm just not really sure where they're going to sit for me yet, and I'll just give them a little bit of a play. I may do a few little challenges here and there, just a few daily readings just to see how it works. Of course, I'll dip in and out of the guidebook to see if there's anything of interest there for me. But again, these are just kind of examples of decks that aren't really tied into a overall theme for the month, and they're not really related to a particular practice that I'm doing, but they're decks that I've brought in for a particular purpose, whether that is to get to know it for practice later on, to get to know it to see if it's going to be a deck that I want to work with. A lot of times I will also pull out older decks that I just haven't worked with in a while to reacquaint myself with them. That's another great way to incorporate some decks into your work, is to have one deck, one new deck, one old deck. That's something that I definitely like to do. Kind of gives that balance between what I already am familiar with and what I am just learning for the first time. And then we have decks that are like this, that are they're just for a very specific purpose, and I really don't have any intention of, doing anything more with it later on down the line. It's just a tool for right now. So those are kind of examples of decks that are brought into my work for the month because they serve a particular purpose. So then we have decks that I bring in and work with because they relate to a specific practice that I have. So this goes into things that are kind of beyond the daily tarot readings. This is more talking about decks that I use as a tool for a larger practice. So for example, I have the Mysteries of Mary Tarot, and this is a deck that I often use for my full moon work. And it's a deck that I am going to be returning to again in 2023, at least for a couple of months probably, for pulling cards every month at the full moon. Now I have a specific practice that revolves around that, and it's tied into work with Mother Mary and things of that nature. And it's not so much about the deck itself, right? The deck is a tool in that practice. The readings are just another layer added into that practice. But the practice itself is more about working with the moon energy, the full moon energy, and Mother Mary, and my devotions during that time. So that's a case where the deck just really becomes a tool in a larger practice. The same can be said kind of for this little Flora Healing deck. This is a deck that I am pulling in for setting intention for my overall personal growth practice. So I'm pulling one of these cards every month, and that's tied into a larger practice on the whole. This just becomes a support card for that practice. And then we have things, for example, I have the Into the Lonely Woods here, and this is a deck that I am currently actually using for a daily oracle card pull. So I like to pull a card at the start of my day to give me a message to sit with me throughout the day as I'm just going about my day. And I usually set it up on my working desk, my computer desk, which is on the other side of the room. And this is an oracle card that sits with me throughout the day. I do not journal about it. I don't do deep dives into it. It's just a little card with a little energy. Sometimes I get into the guidebook. Sometimes I just sit with the image and maybe the text at the bottom, the key phrase that's at the bottom. Sometimes it's just all about the image. And this type of a deck for me tends to be whatever kind of an energy I'm looking to integrate into my work for the month. So for example, in January, I'm doing a lot of clean slate stuff. I'm doing a lot of kind of reset, refocus, create new intentions, create plans to move forward. It's a lot of heavy into the mind realm of things. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of being really intentional about the way I go about things. And it's very much in that headspace. And so to balance that, and I also have a lot of very clean, white, kind of almost stark decks that I'm working with throughout the month in terms of my practice, in terms of my tarot practice. So to balance that, I've got this lovely, warm, naturey, supportive kind of energy coming through the Into the Lonely Woods. There's just something about these little creatures that just make me feel all warm and cuddly and cozy inside. And because winter can be very stark, the decks I've chosen to reflect not only the theme for the month, but also the seasonal energy are very stark. And this just gives a nice kind of little warm fuzzy feeling to start my day with. And whenever I start feeling like that kind of cold, detached, really into the mental realm energy starts to become a little bit overwhelming, I can return to these cards. And I can return to that energy. And I can pull a little bit of these gentle creatures into my day. I think that's the title of the other deck by this group, this artist. But the point being that I have an oracle deck. I like to pull an oracle card, primarily oracle, every morning as a way to create an energy for me to tap into throughout the day whenever I need it. It's a practice that I do pretty regularly, and I'll select an oracle deck that really reflects that energy that I'm trying to bring in. Or in this case, an energy that I know that I'm going to need to reconnect with periodically throughout the day because of the type of other work that I'm doing. So I'm using this as a way to sort of counterbalance the work that I'm doing, but it can also very much be a way to support it. You know, it's really great when they all kind of connect and work thematically, purposefully, and within my practice all together. But the real key here is to find the decks that sort of resonate with that energy. And when we talk about deck energies and how a deck reads and how it feels, right? Everything has for me a separate energy. I very much personify my decks. I did a whole video on talking about that. I'll leave that linked in the description box below for you. But each of these decks and all of the decks that I've talked about and all the decks that I'm going to be talking about when I share with you the decks that I've worked with throughout the month of January, they all have a specific energy. And for the most part, they all serve a particular purpose or practice in my daily work. And what that is and how I relate to it is a very personal thing. will be personal for each of us. But I get a lot of questions about like, how do I select my decks and how do I decide what I'm gonna work with, because I do have a larger collection and I know that can be really overwhelming. I do find that having a theme every month through the monthly medicine or through tarot challenges or just creating your own theme is really, really helpful, because it kind of gives you a focal point for the month and you can build your decks around that if you don't have additional practices and things that you're pulling your tarot and oracle cards into. So even just having the one theme for the month, say tree energy, or I'm gonna work with the moon, or I'm gonna work with decks that have a very earthy nature or a very clean feeling, or decks that, you know, focus thematically on maybe fae or fairies or that type of thing. So even just selecting a theme for yourself for the month can be really, really helpful in helping you kind of bring together decks that will support that, and also can help you, you know, kind of rotate through your decks more often, because if you're using decks in alignment with a certain theme and that theme moves, then you're going to be shifting your decks out to match that theme. I do also keep at hand in this little cart next to me, I have any new decks that have come in that I need to spend some time with, old favorites that I'm always working with. I do have my favorites basket, which you all have seen in that video, but I also beside me have, you know, things like my Disney villains, my Blessed Bee, all of my Southern Gothics, like those decks that I use regularly for practices and for various things. Some of those don't really change. So they're still hanging out there. They're still going to be there. They're still at hand, and I will pull those in. I think it's really important to also like give yourself permission and have that leeway to pull in whatever it is that you feel drawn to at the moment. Yes, I do have a theme, I do have a focus, I do have certain practices and purposes for my decks, but I always honor if I come to my desk and I'm looking to do a reading and I'm feeling like none of these are hitting the mark for me. I'll give you a great example of that. A couple of weeks ago, I was struggling with some family things going on, and I just needed a supportive message. And so I pulled out my Northern Animal, because this is a deck that not only just makes me happy whenever I use it, but it's a deck that I find to be really nurturing, really supportive. It feels very community driven. It feels very family oriented in the fact that these characters all feel like they're a part of this family in this little world. They're like this little village here. And it's such a great deck for that. And when I was struggling with some family issues and I just like, I'd had enough and I just needed the reset and I needed a little bit of that supportive message, I pulled a 3-card reading from the Northern Animal just to give me that little boost that I needed, just to give me that little bit of clarity. It wasn't a deck that was in my practice. It wasn't a deck that I showed in my monthly reflections for December. It was just a deck that I pulled in the moment. And that is kind of why I like to keep my favorite decks like this one, the decks that I work with in my favorites basket, as well as the decks that I have in the cart beside me that have like decks related to specific readings or practices. I like to keep those at hand because I never know when I'm going to feel the need to pull one of those out, when the call is going to be there, and these decks aren't going to get it for me. Into the Lonely Woods might have been a good one for that, but whenever I feel the need to just pull something in, to have something that offers me something very unique or very specific, then I'm always going to honor that. So that's it. That's kind of a look at how I go about selecting my decks. The 3 main things that I look at, which is the theme of the month, any decks that I have set aside for a particular purpose, and decks that I use for very specific practices. And I like to kind of just intermingle. I like to switch things out. I like to focus on certain energies. Like I said, a lot of that is also seasonally based. So I have, as you've probably seen if you've seen some of my other videos or heard me talk about other, my deck collection and things like that, I have baskets, one for each of the seasons, and I have decks in there that relate to those seasonal energies. So when I'm feeling like just very in the winter mood, I'll go to my winter basket and pull those out. Or when we are literally in winter, I will pull those out as well. On a rare occasion, I will pull out a deck that has a totally opposite energy for the current season that I am in. So sometimes in the midst of winter, I will pull out a very bright and colorful deck because I'm just tired of the gray. It's gray everywhere where I live, and I'm tired of the gray, so I will pull out like a really bright, colorful, fun deck just to give me that little boost of brightness and of sun and energy. And so that's another thing that I will often do in my practice in selecting my decks. But when it comes to kind of pre-planning, pre-selecting, those are the things that I look at. And then I just always honor whatever I feel called to pull in the moment. Sometimes my thematic decks will shift. I'll pull one out, and particularly if it's a new deck, if it's not working for me, then that's okay. I will move on to something else. I'll put it away or maybe put it into a purgatory box for further consideration. I always honor what my intuition is telling me in my work with my decks. So I hope that answered all the questions. If you have any more questions about how I select my decks or the different practices or processes that I use, please feel free to leave them in the comments. As always, you'll find links for everything that I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.